A crumpled envelope changed everything. For 3 years he searched for answers. His ex-wife had vanished without explanation. No goodbye. No reason. Just silence. Then a letter arrived at his door. A letter meant for her. A letter from the Virginia Lottery Commission. What he read inside would shatter him. $10 million. She had won $10 million, and she had hidden it from him, divorced him to keep every penny, disappeared to enjoy a life he would never touch. In that moment, something inside him died, and something far more dangerous took its place. What happened next would leave investigators speechless and a small town forever changed. This is that story.
530 with north of the alleyway, 53rd Street, Waitress,
Her name was Denise Marie Patterson, 33 years old at the time of her death. Born in Hampton, Virginia, the second of 4 children raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. Her mother, Barbara Patterson, cleaned office buildings at night and worked as a cashier during the day. Despite the exhaustion, despite the constant juggling, Barbara never missed a school play, never missed a parent-teacher conference, never let her children feel like they were less than anybody else. Denise was the quiet one in the family, the peacemaker. When her brothers fought over toys or television time, she was the one who smoothed things over with patience and soft words. When money was tight, which was almost always the case in that small apartment, Denise was the one who pretended she wasn't hungry, so her younger brothers could have seconds. She never asked for anything, Barbara would later tell investigators. She'd wear the same shoes until they fell apart, never complained, just smiled and said she was fine. That was my Denise, always making sure everyone else was okay. At 15, Denise got her first job bussing tables at a local diner called Mel's Kitchen. By 17, she had worked her way up to waitressing. By 20, she had become the most requested server at the Starlight Grill in Norfolk, a 24-hour establishment known for its pancakes and its regulars. The kind of place where truckers stopped on long hauls and families came after church on Sundays. Denise fit right in. She remembered that Mr. Henderson liked his eggs over easy with extra toast. She remembered that Mrs. Dawson's grandson had just started first grade. She remembered birthdays, anniversaries, the small details that made people feel seen in a world that often looked right through them. A former coworker named Angela recalled those years with fondness. Denise had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, she said. Even when we were slammed on a Saturday morning, every table full, orders backing up, she'd still ask how your day was going, and she actually wanted to know. That wasn't an act. That was just who she was. Despite her dedication and the love her customers showed her, Denise never made more than $28,000 a year. Tips varied wildly depending on the night. Some shifts she'd walk out with $80 in her pocket feeling like she'd hit the lottery. Other nights, barely $20 for 8 hours on her feet. She learned to budget down to the penny. Coupons became a science. Generic brands became a lifestyle. Thrift store clothes she somehow made look elegant through sheer force of personality. But Denise had dreams bigger than scraping by. She kept a notebook, worn at the edges from years of handling, filled with menu ideas, sketches of table arrangements, names she might give to her own restaurant someday. Her favorite potential name was written in careful letters on the first page: Second Chances Cafe. A place where she could serve breakfast and lunch, close by 3 in the afternoon, and actually have evenings to herself. A place that would be hers. What happens when someone who has spent their entire life giving to others finally receives something in return? Denise Patterson was about to find out. But the answer would not be the blessing anyone expected. Because sometimes fortune arrives wrapped in danger. Sometimes the moment your life changes for the better is the same moment that seals your fate. And sometimes the person you trust the most becomes the reason you can never truly be safe. Before we continue with Denise's story, if you're finding this case as compelling as we do, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and share this video. You're going to want to follow this case all the way to its devastating conclusion. In the summer of 2013, a man walked into the Starlight Grill and sat down in Denise Patterson's section. He ordered coffee, left a $20 tip on a $4 check, and asked for her number. His name was Terrence Wallace, and meeting him would be the biggest mistake of her life. Terrence Dwayne Wallace was born in Newport News, Virginia, 3 years before Denise. He was the only child of parents who divorced when he was 7 years old. His childhood became a battlefield where he was both the prize and the weapon. His mother bought him toys to make up for his father's absence. His father took him on weekend trips to prove he was the better parent. Neither one of them taught him accountability. Both of them taught him that love was something you could trade for, something you could manipulate, something that came with conditions and rewards. A family friend who knew the Wallace household during those years offered this observation. Terrence learned early that if he smiled the right way, said the right things, people would give him what he wanted. It worked on his parents. It worked on his teachers. It worked on pretty much everyone he met. That charm became his primary survival skill. Why work hard when you could talk your way into opportunities? Why take responsibility when you could deflect blame onto someone else? These were lessons Terrence absorbed before he was old enough to understand. Their cost. He was intelligent, no question about that. Teachers recognized potential in him, but potential without discipline is just wasted promise. Terrence started community college twice and dropped out twice. He talked constantly about becoming a business owner, an entrepreneur, a real estate investor. He had plans, dozens of plans, elaborate visions of wealth and success that seemed so vivid when he described them. None of them ever materialized beyond conversation. Between the ages of 20 and 30, Terrence held 17 different jobs, retail positions, warehouse work, a brief stint selling cars at a dealership, an even shorter attempt at telemarketing. He never lasted more than 6 months at any of them. There was always a reason: a bad manager who didn't appreciate him, unfair treatment from coworkers, a better opportunity supposedly waiting just around the corner. One former employer, a warehouse supervisor named Donald, remembered Terrence clearly. He was charming during the interview, Donald recalled. Told me exactly what I wanted to hear. Showed up on time the first week, full of energy and promises. But once he felt comfortable, the effort disappeared. He'd show up late, leave early, take long breaks, and when I called him on it, somehow, it was always somebody else's fault, never his. This pattern repeated itself in Terrence's romantic relationships as well. Before Denise, there was a string of women who all experienced the same cycle. Intense beginnings filled with grand gestures, flowers for no reason, compliments that made them feel like the center of the universe, promises of forever that seemed so sincere. Then gradually, the mask would slip, the charm would fade, the demands would increase, the criticism would start. One ex-girlfriend, who asked to remain anonymous, described her experience with Terrence in stark terms. "He made me feel like I was the most special person in the world," she said, "for about 3 months. Then I became his bank account, his maid, and his punching bag for every frustration in his life. If something went wrong at work, it was my fault for not being supportive enough. If he couldn't pay his bills, it was my fault for not helping more. Everything that went wrong in his world became my responsibility to fix." How do we recognize danger when it comes wrapped in charisma? When the warning signs are hidden behind flowers and compliments and whispered promises of devotion? When the red flags look, at first glance, like romance? Denise Patterson would soon face these questions herself, because in the summer of 2013, Terrence Wallace walked into her life with a smile, a generous tip, and a request for her phone number. She had no way of knowing that the man asking for her attention was the same man who would one day hunt her across state lines. The same man who would decide that if he couldn't have her money, no one would. The first date felt like something out of a movie. Terrence took Denise to a restaurant she could never have afforded on her own, the kind of place with cloth napkins and wine lists and servers who knew which fork to use for which course. He held doors open for her. He pulled out her chair before she could reach for it herself. He listened, or at least appeared to listen, when she talked about her dreams of opening a cafe someday. His eyes never wandered to his phone. His attention never drifted to other women in the room. For one evening, Denise Patterson felt like the most important person in the world. Over the following weeks, Terrence became a constant presence in her life. He showed up at the Starlight Grill during her shifts with coffee and pastries from a bakery across town. He texted her good morning before she woke up and good night before she fell asleep. He called just to hear her voice, he said, just to know she was okay. After years of working long hours and going home to an empty apartment, after years of being the one who took care of everyone else, Terrence's attention felt like a miracle. Here was someone who wanted to spend time with her, someone who thought she was special, someone who had plans, ambitions, a vision for the future that somehow included her. What Denise didn't recognize, what she couldn't have known without experience or warning, was that she was being manipulated. Psychologists call this behavior love bombing. It's a manipulation technique where someone overwhelms their target with affection, attention, and grand gestures designed to create emotional dependence. The goal isn't love. The goal is control. Love bombing creates a kind of emotional debt, one relationship expert explained during the investigation. The victim feels so grateful, so overwhelmed by the attention, that they become willing to overlook warning signs later. They remember how good it felt at the beginning and keep hoping to get back to that place. Even in those early weeks, there were warning signs Denise missed or chose to explain away. The way Terrence's jaw tightened when she mentioned a male coworker. The questions about where she was, who she was with, why she hadn't responded to his text within 5 minutes. The way he'd joke about her boring job and her small dreams. Comments that stung even when delivered with a smile. Her friend Carla noticed something was off and tried to say something. I told her it felt like too much too fast, Carla recalled. But she'd been alone for so long. She didn't want to hear it. She'd say he's just protective. That's how you know he cares. I didn't push it. I wish I had. By the 3rd month of their relationship, Terrence had moved into Denise's apartment. He said it was temporary, just until he got back on his feet after his latest job didn't work out. His rent contribution was sporadic at best. His job hunting consisted mainly of talking about jobs he might apply for someday. But his opinions about her spending, her schedule, and her friendships were constant and increasingly controlling. Denise found herself covering more and more of his expenses. The electric bill when he forgot to contribute, groceries because he was between paychecks, his car payment when his check was late, his phone bill when money was tight. She told herself it was temporary. He was trying. He had potential. Once he found the right opportunity, everything would balance out. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you've made it to this point in the story, comment "I'm still here" so we can see who's following Denise's journey with us. She didn't realize that she was slowly becoming his financial lifeline, that every bill she covered, every excuse she accepted, every warning sign she ignored was tightening a trap around her own future. Terrence proposed in January 2014, 7 months after they first met at the Starlight Grill. He got down on one knee in the parking lot of the restaurant where she worked, surrounded by her co-workers who had been tipped off to come outside. The ring was modest, a small diamond on a thin gold band. Denise would later discover he had purchased it with money he'd taken from her purse without asking, but in that moment, kneeling in the winter cold with snowflakes catching in his hair, he looked like everything she had ever wanted. She almost said no. Something in her gut whispered that this was moving too fast, that 7 months wasn't long enough to truly know someone, that the man who texted her constantly and showed up unannounced and criticized her friends might not be the partner she wanted for the rest of her life. But the crowd was watching. Her co-workers were cheering. And Terrence was looking up at her with those eyes that could make her believe anything he said. So she said yes. Her mother, Barbara, asked her point blank before the wedding if she was truly happy. I asked her if this was what she really wanted, Barbara recalled. She said she thought she could be happy with him. That's not the same thing as being happy, and we both knew it. But she was grown. I couldn't make the decision for her. They married in April 2014 at a small church in Norfolk. 40 guests, mostly Denise's family and co-workers. a potluck reception in the church basement, because a catered affair was beyond their budget. Denise wore a dress she'd found at a consignment shop and altered herself, adding lace to the sleeves and taking in the waist until it fit perfectly. She looked beautiful in the photographs. She also looked, if you studied them closely, like someone bracing for impact. The honeymoon was a weekend trip to Virginia Beach, paid for entirely by Denise because Terrence was between jobs again. By the time they returned to their apartment, he had quit his latest position, something about a disagreement with a supervisor who didn't respect him. He announced he was going to focus on his entrepreneurial ventures for a while. Those ventures never materialized. Within 6 months of the wedding, the dynamic of their relationship had crystallized into something Denise hadn't anticipated. She was working overtime at the Starlight Grill, picking up every extra shift she could, while Terrence spent his days watching television, playing video games, and complaining about how unfair life had been to him. A neighbor in their apartment complex, an elderly woman named Dorothy, observed the situation from across the hall. "You'd see her leaving for work before sunrise and coming home after midnight," Dorothy said, "dragging herself up those stairs looking like she hadn't slept in days, and you'd see him on the balcony in the middle of the afternoon, smoking cigarettes, looking bored. It didn't take a genius to figure out who was carrying that household." Denise wanted to believe things would get better. She had made a vow before God and her family. In her understanding of the world, in the values she'd been raised with, you didn't give up on a marriage just because it was hard. You worked at it. You prayed. You endured. She wrote in her journal during that first year of marriage, "I keep waiting for him to become the man he promised to be. The man I saw on that first date. The one who opened doors and listened to my dreams. Maybe I'm waiting for someone who doesn't exist." The cruelest prisons are often the ones we build ourselves brick by brick, with hope and loyalty, and the belief that tomorrow will somehow be different from today. Denise Patterson was trapped, not by locks or chains, but by vows she took seriously and a man who never intended to honor his. The marriage lasted from April 2014 to late October 2016. 2.5 years of slow erosion that wore Denise down like water against stone. From the outside, they might have looked like any other young couple struggling to make ends meet. But inside that apartment, behind closed doors, a different reality was taking shape. Terrence's unemployment became permanent. He stopped even pretending to look for work. When Denise suggested job listings or mentioned openings she'd heard about from customers, he'd accuse her of nagging, of not believing in him, of being just like everyone else who didn't understand his potential. His criticism became constant and corrosive. Nothing she did was ever good enough for him. The apartment wasn't clean enough, even though she was the only one who cleaned it. The food she cooked after exhausting shifts wasn't good enough, even though he never lifted a finger in the kitchen. Her appearance wasn't attractive enough, even though she barely had time to shower between work and sleep. "Why do you always look so tired?" he'd ask, as if her exhaustion was a personal failing rather than the direct result of supporting them both. The financial abuse started small, so gradual that Denise didn't recognize it for what it was. Terrence began taking money from her accounts without asking. $20 here for something he needed. $50 there for an opportunity he was pursuing. Then larger amounts that he always promised to pay back, but never did. When she confronted him about the missing money, he turned the accusation around on her. She was being controlling, he said. She didn't trust him. Didn't she understand that married couples share everything? What was hers was his, and she was being selfish to think otherwise. "What Terrence was doing is textbook economic abuse," a financial counselor who later reviewed the case explained. He made himself completely financially dependent on her, while simultaneously controlling how she spent her own money. Every purchase she made had to be justified to him. Every dollar she earned was subject to his approval. It's about power, not partnership. The isolation happened gradually, too. Over time, Denise saw her friends less and less frequently. Her family called less often. Terrence had a way of making every social interaction exhausting. He'd sulk for days if she spent time with anyone but him. He'd start arguments before she left to see friends and continue them when she returned. Eventually, it became easier to just stay home, Just avoid the conflict. Just keep the peace. The woman who once greeted customers with genuine warmth became withdrawn. Her coworkers noticed the change. She smiled less, talked less. She still did her job well, still remembered everyone's orders and asked about their families, but something behind her eyes had gone quiet. A coworker named Michelle approached her once during a slow afternoon shift. I asked her if everything was okay at home, Michelle recalled. She just looked at me for a long moment, like she was deciding whether to tell me the truth. I could see it in her face, this exhaustion that went deeper than tired. Then she smiled, that same smile she gave to customers, and said everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. Anyone with eyes could see that. If you're finding this story as heartbreaking as we do, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your loved ones. Stories like Denise's are more common than anyone wants to believe, and awareness might just protect someone you care about from the same fate. By October 2016, Denise Patterson was 30 years old, exhausted beyond measure, and trapped in a marriage that was slowly destroying her. She had given up on her dreams of opening a cafe. She had given up on the idea of escape. She had almost given up on hope itself. And then, on a random Tuesday night, she stopped at a gas station on her way home from work and made an impulse purchase that would change everything. She bought a scratch-off lottery ticket. What happened next would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately cost her life. October 18th, 2016, a Tuesday. Denise had just finished a grueling shift at the Starlight Grill, the kind that left her feet throbbing and her lower back aching in ways that no amount of stretching could fix. She had exactly $47 in tips folded in her apron pocket. Decent money for a weeknight, but nothing that would change her circumstances. She always stopped at the same gas station on her way home, a place called Quick Stop on Route 17, where a young attendant named Jerome had worked the night shift for years. He knew her order by heart: a small coffee, black, no sugar, and occasionally a candy bar if tips had been particularly good that evening. That night, as Jerome rang up her coffee, Denise's eyes drifted to the lottery ticket display behind the counter. She didn't usually buy tickets. She knew the odds were astronomical. Her mother had always called the lottery a tax on hope, money thrown away by people who couldn't afford to lose it. But something made her pause that evening. Maybe it was exhaustion clouding her judgment. Maybe it was desperation looking for any exit from the life she was living. "Give me one of those," she heard herself say, pointing to the $20 scratch-off tickets, the expensive ones with bigger prizes. Jerome raised an eyebrow because she'd never bought one before in all the years he'd known her. But he didn't comment. He just slid the ticket across the counter and took her $20. She didn't scratch it at the counter. She sat in her car in the parking lot with the engine running and the heater blowing lukewarm air against her tired face. She found a quarter in the cup holder and began scratching slowly, methodically, from left to right. The first number matched. Her heart rate increased slightly, but she'd seen first numbers match before. It didn't mean anything yet. Then the second number matched, and the third. Her hands began to tremble. The fourth number matched, then the fifth. She stopped breathing. She looked at the prize amount revealed beneath the winning combination, certain she must be reading it wrong, certain the dim light in the parking lot was playing tricks on her exhausted eyes. $10 million. The ticket said $10 million. For a full minute, Denise didn't move. The ticket trembled in her hands like it was alive. Her vision blurred with tears she couldn't control. She made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob, a noise she'd never made before in her life, the sound of someone whose entire reality had just shifted on its axis. Jerome noticed her car sitting in the lot for nearly 20 minutes that night. "I thought maybe something was wrong," he recalled later. Like maybe her car wouldn't start or she got bad news or something. Then she just drove off. I didn't think about it again until I saw the news weeks later about someone in the area winning big on a scratch-off. What does it feel like to suddenly possess more money than you've ever imagined? To go from counting pennies to counting millions in the span of scratching 6 numbers? For most people, it would be pure, uncomplicated joy. But for Denise Patterson, the joy was complicated by a truth she understood immediately and completely. This money meant she could finally leave. This money meant freedom from aching feet and a husband who drained her dry while criticizing everything she did. But this money also meant danger, because she knew Terrence. She knew what he would do if he found out. He would drain her accounts, gambling on schemes and dreams that never materialized. He would trap her even tighter than before, using her wealth as leverage and control. Denise sat in that parking lot with a winning lottery ticket worth $10 million, and instead of calling anyone, instead of celebrating, she began to plan her escape. The question was whether she could execute it before Terrence discovered what she was hiding. Denise didn't go home immediately after discovering she'd won. She drove to a 24-hour Walmart parking lot about 3 miles from the gas station and sat there until her hands stopped shaking. The ticket was tucked inside her apron, pressed against her chest like a secret heartbeat. She called no one. She told no one. She just sat in the dark with the engine idling, thinking through every possible scenario, every consequence, every move she might make in the game that had suddenly become her life. She thought about telling Terrence. She imagined his reaction, played it out in her mind like a movie she'd seen too many times before. First would come the joy, the celebration, the promises of how their lives were finally going to change. Then would come the demands. He'd want to quit any pretense of seeking employment, not that he was looking now. He'd want to buy things, expensive things, cars and clothes and gadgets that would drain their fortune faster than she could imagine. He'd want control of the finances, managing their accounts, making the decisions, turning her windfall into his personal treasury. And if she tried to say no, if she tried to set boundaries, if she tried to protect even a portion of what she'd won for herself and her dreams, the criticism would intensify. The isolation would tighten. The trap would become permanent, lined with gold instead of poverty, but a trap nonetheless. Virginia is one of several states that allows lottery winners to remain anonymous, but even anonymous winners leave trails. The money had to be claimed through official channels. It had to go somewhere, into accounts that could be traced and monitored. And Terrence, despite his many flaws, wasn't stupid. He would notice if their circumstances suddenly changed. He would ask questions. He would dig until he found answers. Denise spent hours in that parking lot researching on her phone. She learned about Virginia's divorce laws. She learned how marital assets are divided, how property acquired during marriage is typically considered community property. The legal reality hit her like cold water. If she claimed the lottery winnings while still married to Terrence, he would be entitled to half of everything. Possibly more, depending on how aggressive his lawyer was. All those years of supporting him, carrying him, paying his bills while he contributed nothing, none of that would matter in divorce court. The law would see them as equal partners in a marriage, equally entitled to assets acquired during their union. But if she divorced him first, if the marriage was dissolved before she claimed the prize, the money would be hers alone. It would belong to the person she was about to become, not the woman trapped in a marriage she should have escaped years ago. The decision formed in her mind with absolute clarity. She would file for divorce first. She would wait until the divorce was finalized, however long that took. Only then would she claim her winnings. It meant weeks, possibly months of continued pretense. It meant serving Terrence breakfast and listening to his complaints and sleeping beside him every night while carrying a secret that burned in her chest. It meant lying to everyone she loved, everyone who might accidentally reveal the truth to the wrong person. But it was the only way. Thank you so much for your incredible support. This channel exists because of viewers like you who care about these stories. If you want to help us keep creating content like this, consider joining our YouTube membership for exclusive perks and early access to upcoming documentaries. Your support means more than you know. She wrote in her journal that night, words that would later be found by investigators. I have to be patient. I have to be smart. I've waited 30 years for something like this. I can wait a little longer. The next morning, Denise woke up early, made Terrence his favorite breakfast, kissed him on the cheek as she left for work, and began quietly gathering the documents she would need to file for divorce. She had 12 days to maintain the illusion, 12 days to pretend everything was normal. 12 days before she could start running toward freedom. Denise filed for divorce on October 30th, 2016, exactly 12 days after scratching that winning ticket in a gas station parking lot. She cited irreconcilable differences on the paperwork, the legal catch-all that covers everything from falling out of love to escaping a marriage that was slowly killing you. She asked for nothing from Terrence, no alimony, no division of their meager assets, no negotiation over who got the furniture or the television or the car that was registered in her name, but that he drove more often than she did. She just wanted out. Terrence came home that afternoon to find her bags already packed and a process server waiting on the front porch. The look on his face shifted through confusion, then anger, then something she hadn't expected, genuine bewilderment. He kept asking why, Denise later told a friend. Like he genuinely couldn't understand what he'd done wrong. Like the last 2 years hadn't happened. Like I was the one being unreasonable. He tried calling her in the eye, days that followed. She didn't answer. He tried showing up at the Starlight Grill. Her manager, a former military man named Carl, who had seen too many women in similar situations, told him in no uncertain terms to leave and not come back. For several weeks, Terrence cycled through every stage of rejection. He left voicemails that alternated between tearful apologies and bitter accusations. He sent text messages promising to change, to get a job, to become the man she deserved. When those didn't work, the messages turned cruel, calling her names, accusing her of having someone else, threatening to make her regret this decision. Denise saved every message, but responded to none of them. She was playing a longer game now, one that required patience and silence and an iron will she hadn't known she possessed. The divorce moved quickly through the system. Without children to complicate custody arrangements and without significant assets to divide, there was nothing to fight over. Terrence's initial assumption that she would come crawling back prevented him from contesting the proceedings in their early stages. By the time he realized she was serious, it was too late to mount an effective opposition. The divorce was finalized in February 2017. Denise Marie Patterson was legally a free woman. Within days of the divorce decree being signed, she walked into the Virginia Lottery headquarters and claimed her prize. She chose the lump sum option, approximately $6.2 million after taxes. She requested anonymity, which Virginia granted. She opened new bank accounts under her name alone, accounts Terrence would have no way of accessing or even knowing existed. And then she began the careful work of disappearing. She gave 2 weeks' notice at the Starlight Grill. Her coworkers threw her a small going-away party, pressing her for details about where she was headed. She just smiled and said she needed a change, Michelle recalled. Wouldn't say where she was going. Wouldn't say what she was planning. Just hugged everybody and said she'd miss us. We never heard from her again. She changed her phone number. She deleted her social media accounts. She packed what little she owned into her car and drove away from Norfolk without looking back. As far as anyone who knew her could tell, Denise Patterson had simply vanished. Terrence was furious. He felt abandoned, betrayed, discarded like something disposable. He couldn't understand how someone could just leave without explanation, without negotiation, without giving him a chance to talk her out of it. The unanswered questions ate at him. Why did she leave so suddenly? Why wouldn't she respond to his messages? Why did the divorce feel so carefully orchestrated? Something wasn't right. He was certain she was hiding something. And Terrence Wallace was not the kind of man who could let a mystery like that go unsolved. What he didn't know yet was that the mystery had an answer worth $10 million. And discovering that answer would transform his wounded pride into something far more dangerous. From February 2017 to October 2019, nearly 3 full years, Terrence Wallace searched for his ex-wife with an obsession that consumed his entire existence. What began as wounded pride and unanswered questions evolved into something all-encompassing, a fixation that dominated his thoughts and dictated his actions. He couldn't accept that she had simply walked away. He couldn't believe that the woman who had supported him, tolerated him, stayed with him through years of unemployment and criticism and broken promises, had just decided one day that she was done. There had to be more to the story. There had to be a reason. His early efforts were casual, almost haphazard. He'd scroll through social media platforms late at night, trying different variations of her name, searching for new accounts she might have created. He reached out to mutual acquaintances, people they'd known during their marriage, asking if anyone had heard from her. The answers were always the same. Nobody knew where Denise had gone. He even filed a missing persons report with the Norfolk Police Department, convinced that something terrible must have happened to her. The officer who took his report was patient but direct. "Mr. Wallace, your ex-wife isn't missing," he explained. "She left voluntarily. She filed for divorce. She quit her job. Adults are allowed to relocate without informing their former spouses. There's no crime here." But Terrence couldn't accept that explanation. He returned to the police department multiple times in 2017 and again in 2018, each time insisting that something was wrong, that Denise would never just disappear without a word. Each time, he was told the same thing. She wasn't missing. She had simply chosen not to be found. His own life during this period continued its downward trajectory. Without Denise's income to rely on, he couldn't maintain the apartment they'd shared. He couch-surfed for a while, staying with friends until he wore out his welcome. He moved in with his mother for a few months, a tense arrangement that ended badly. He worked sporadically, picking up temporary jobs in warehouses and delivery services, but nothing lasted. His focus was elsewhere. His mind was always circling back to the same questions. Where did she go? Why did she leave? What was she hiding from him? A former friend named Derek eventually cut ties with Terrence entirely. "He became impossible to be around," Derek explained. "Every conversation, no matter what you started talking about, would eventually come back to Denise. Where do you think she went? Do you think she's with someone else? Why won't anyone help me find her?" He'd go on for hours. I finally told him he needed to either get therapy or get out of my house. He chose to leave. By late 2018, Terrence had convinced himself that Denise was concealing something significant. Her sudden departure, her complete disappearance, her refusal to communicate. None of it made sense, unless there was a secret she was protecting. He began keeping notes, writing down theories and connections and suspicions in a journal that would later serve as evidence against him. He wrote about betrayal and theft and justice. He wrote about the life he deserved and the woman who had taken it from him. He wrote about finding her, confronting her, making her understand what she had done. The entries grew increasingly disturbing as months passed, the handwriting more erratic, the language more threatening. But despite his obsession, despite the hours spent searching and the theories endlessly refined, Terrence couldn't find her. She had covered her tracks too well. She had built too many walls between her old life and her new one. For 3 years, Denise Patterson remained a ghost, and Terrence Wallace remained a man haunted by her absence. Then, in October 2019, a letter arrived at an address where Terrence happened to be staying. A letter addressed to Denise, forwarded through the postal system from her last known address. A letter from the Virginia Lottery Commission that would shatter whatever remained of Terrence Wallace's humanity and set him on a path toward murder. October 22, 2019. Almost exactly 3 years after Denise scratched that winning ticket in a gas station parking lot. Terrence was staying at the time with an old high school friend named Victor in a cramped apartment in Norfolk. He was between jobs again, which was his permanent state of existence at that point, filling his days with television and video games and the simmering resentment that had become his constant companion. That Tuesday afternoon, he decided to check the mail. Not his mail, of course, since he didn't officially live there, but Victor's mail. He was bored and restless, and looking for anything to break up the monotony of another empty day. Among the bills and pizza coupons and credit card offers was an envelope that made him stop cold. It was addressed to Denise Patterson at an address he recognized, their old apartment, with forwarding stamps showing it had been redirected multiple times before ending up here. The return address bore an official logo, the Virginia Lottery Commission. His first instinct was to throw it away. Junk mail, he figured. Some kind of promotional material trying to get people to buy more tickets. But something made him tear it open anyway. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the same instinct that had driven him to search for her for 3 years. Inside was a routine correspondence from the Lottery Commission regarding tax documentation for a substantial prize claimed in 2017. The letter referenced the original winning date, the claim date, and the total amount. Terrence read it 3 times. The words didn't make sense at first, refused to arrange themselves into meaning his brain could process. A prize claimed, $10 million. February 2017. The same month their divorce was finalized. I couldn't breathe, he later told investigators. I literally couldn't breathe. It was like someone had punched me in the chest. $10 million. She had $10 million, and she divorced me so she could keep it all. The timeline crystallized in his mind with devastating clarity. She had won the lottery in October 2016. She had filed for divorce 12 days later. She had claimed the money in February 2017, immediately after the divorce was finalized. Every piece of the puzzle that had tormented him for 3 years suddenly clicked into place. She hadn't left him because she stopped loving him. She hadn't left him because she was unhappy or needed space or wanted to find herself. She had left him because she was rich. She had planned everything, orchestrated every step, timed every move to ensure that he would be legally excluded from the fortune that should have been half his. In Terrence's mind, the narrative was clear. She had robbed him. She had deceived him. She had cheated him out of the life he was owed after everything he believed he had sacrificed during their marriage. The fact that she had been the one working while he stayed home, the fact that she had paid every bill and covered every expense, the fact that he had contributed nothing financially to their partnership for years, none of that registered in his calculations. He could only see one truth. She had $10 million that should have belonged to both of them, and she had taken it all. Victor came home that evening to find Terrence in a state he'd never witnessed before. His face was flushed red with fury. His hands were trembling. There was a hole in the living room wall where he'd punched through the drywall. She robbed me, Terrence kept saying over and over, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. She robbed me blind. Everything she has should be mine. Victor tried to calm him down, tried to suggest that maybe he should talk to a lawyer. Maybe there was a legal remedy he could pursue. But Terrence wasn't interested in lawyers anymore. He'd tried the legal route after the divorce and gotten nowhere. This time, he was going to handle things himself. This time, he was going to get what he believed he was owed, one way or another. Within hours of reading that letter, Terrence Wallace began making phone calls. His first call was to a divorce attorney, a cheap one whose number he found online. He explained the situation. His ex-wife had won the lottery while they were married, hidden it from him, and then divorced him to keep the money. Was there anything he could do? Could he contest the divorce settlement? Could he sue for his rightful share? The attorney's answer was blunt and discouraging. He told me the divorce was final, Terrence recalled. Said because she claimed the money after we were legally separated, I had no claim to it. Said the timing worked perfectly in her favor, like she'd planned it exactly that way. He told me to move on with my life. Move on to what? Terrence had no job, no savings, no prospects, and no future worth imagining. Meanwhile, his ex-wife was living somewhere with millions of dollars, money that should have transformed his life too, money he felt entitled to after years of marriage. That was how he framed it in his mind. He had earned that money by being her husband. The fact that she had done all the actual work, made all the actual sacrifices, carried all the actual weight, meant nothing to him. In his version of reality, he deserved compensation. Rejected by the legal system, Terrence turned to other options. He spent hours online researching ways to locate people who didn't want to be found. Eventually, he connected with someone called a skip tracer, a professional who specializes in tracking down individuals who have gone off the grid. Skip tracers operate in a legal gray area, using public records, property databases, and social media monitoring to piece together the whereabouts of their targets. For a few $100s, the skip tracer agreed to find Denise Patterson. The process took several weeks. The skip tracer searched property records across multiple states, looking for any transactions that might be connected to Denise's social security number or previous addresses. He monitored social media platforms for any mention of her name or any photographs that might reveal her location. He checked voter registration databases and motor vehicle records and utility connections. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. Denise had moved to a small town in North Carolina. She had purchased a modest home there under a slightly different name, using her middle name as her first name and her mother's maiden name as her surname. Marie Thompson, she was calling herself now, a name designed to disappear. The skip tracer also found something else, a social media post from a distant cousin of Denise's, a photograph from a family reunion that had inadvertently tagged a location in North Carolina. The cousin had deleted the post quickly, probably after realizing the mistake, but not before the skip tracer's monitoring tools captured it. In the age of social media, true anonymity is almost impossible, a privacy expert later observed. You can change your name, move across state lines, delete all your accounts. But all it takes is one careless tag from a family member, one old friend who mentions your new town, and your carefully constructed privacy can collapse overnight. By late October 2019, Terrence had an address. He had a name. He had a target. He told Victor he was taking care of some business and would be gone for a few days. He withdrew what little money he had from his bank account. He bought a prepaid phone that couldn't be traced to his identity, and in the days before he left Virginia, he made several purchases at different stores, always paying cash, always wearing a baseball cap to obscure his face from security cameras. Duct tape, zip ties, rubber gloves, a hunting knife from a sporting goods store. These weren't the purchases of a man planning a conversation. They were the supplies of someone preparing for violence, and if Denise wouldn't give him the money, he was prepared to take something else instead. While Terrence spent 3 years consumed by bitterness and obsession, Denise had built something beautiful with her freedom. She had settled in Hillbrook, North Carolina, a small town of roughly 8,000 people tucked into the rolling hills about 40 miles south of the Virginia border. The kind of place where shopkeepers knew their customers by name, and churches outnumbered bars and people still waved at strangers passing on the street. She had chosen it precisely because it was unremarkable, a town no one would think to search, a community where a quiet woman who paid her bills and minded her business could simply blend in. The house she purchased was modest by any standard, especially for someone with her resources. A 3-bedroom home on a quiet street called Maple Lane, with a generous backyard and a kitchen large enough to actually cook in. She could have afforded a mansion. She could have bought property on the coast or a penthouse in a city, or anything else her imagination could conjure. But Denise didn't want extravagance. After years of cramped apartments and counting pennies and never having enough, she wanted something simple: space, peace, and safety. She went by Marie Thompson now, her middle name combined with her mother's maiden name. A name that wouldn't appear in any searches connected to her past, a name that let her become someone entirely new. For nearly 3 years, Marie Thompson lived quietly in Hillbrook. She joined the local Baptist church but sat in the back pew and didn't volunteer for committees. She shopped at the same grocery store every Tuesday and Saturday, buying ingredients for meals she'd learned to cook from YouTube videos and library cookbooks. She went for walks in the evening when the streets were empty and the air smelled like cut grass and wood smoke from distant fireplaces. She avoided attention, avoided luxury, avoided any behavior that might attract questions about where her money came from. A neighbor named Sandra lived 2 houses down and became something like a friend, though Marie kept even that relationship at careful distance. She was lovely, but very private, Sandra recalled. She'd wave hello when we saw each other, accept an invitation for coffee on the porch, chat about the weather or local gossip. But she never talked about where she came from or who she'd been before. Some of us figured she might be running from an abusive situation. We didn't pry. Everyone deserves their secrets. Despite her fortune, Marie lived well below her means. Her financial planner had set up a conservative investment structure, placing most of her winnings in stable funds that generated steady interest. She lived off that interest, which was more than enough to sustain a comfortable lifestyle indefinitely. Her car was a 3-year-old Honda Accord, practical and forgettable. Her clothes came from regular department stores, nothing designer or flashy. The only indulgence visible to the outside world was her garden, elaborate flower beds that she tended with obvious love, roses and hydrangeas and tulips that made her modest home look like something from a magazine. For the first time in her adult life, Denise woke up without anxiety. She didn't dread the sound of footsteps approaching or brace herself for criticism or calculate whether she had enough money to make it through the week. She read books for pleasure, something she'd never had time for before. She learned to bake bread from scratch. She sat on her back porch in the evenings and watched the fireflies and felt something she barely recognized: peace. She wrote in her journal, words that would later break the hearts of everyone who read them. Sometimes I still can't believe this is real. That I can sit in my own house, in my own quiet, and just exist. I spent so many years afraid. I didn't even know how afraid I was until it stopped. But the past has a way of refusing to stay buried. And in November 2019, Denise Patterson's past was driving south toward her new life with murder on its mind. Terrence Wallace arrived in Hillbrook on November 8, 2019. He checked into a motel called the Pine Rest Inn on the outskirts of town, a shabby establishment that asked few questions and accepted cash without requiring identification. The clerk who processed his check-in remembered him only as quiet and unremarkable, a middle-aged man with a duffel bag who said he was in town visiting family. That evening, using the address provided by the skip tracer, Terrence drove slowly down Maple Lane for the first time. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the streetlights were just beginning to flicker on. Her house was third from the corner, a modest home with blue shutters and flower beds that even in November showed evidence of careful tending. The lights were on inside. Through the front window, he could see movement in the kitchen. A woman, alone, preparing dinner. His ex-wife, living the peaceful life she had taken from him. He parked at the end of the street and watched until the lights went out around 10 o'clock. Then he drove back to his motel room and began planning. Over the following days, Terrence studied Denise with the patience of a predator learning its prey. He noted what time she woke up, usually around 7:30 based on when the bedroom light came on. He noted what time she took her evening walks, typically around 5:30, a loop through the neighborhood that took approximately 20 minutes. He noted which days she went to the grocery store, Tuesdays and Saturdays like clockwork, always returning with modest bags that suggested a single person's shopping. He varied his surveillance locations to avoid suspicion, parking on different streets, watching from different angles, never staying in one spot long enough to draw attention. In the journal found in his motel room after his arrest, Terrence's entries grew increasingly disturbing as the days passed. "She has this little garden," he wrote on November 10th, "flowers everywhere, like she's playing house, like she earned any of this. Everything she has should be mine." Another entry, dated November 12th. "She looks happy. She has no right to be happy. Not after what she did to me. She's going to understand what she took from me. One way or another, she's going to pay." Denise wasn't entirely unaware that something felt wrong. In the days before her death, she mentioned to Sandra that she'd noticed an unfamiliar car on the street several times. A dark blue sedan that seemed to be parked in different spots at different hours. She thought it might be a new resident or someone visiting family in the neighborhood. She asked if I'd seen it, Sandra recalled, her voice breaking during the interview. I told her I hadn't been paying attention. She said it was probably nothing, but I remember the look in her eyes. She looked worried. I wish I'd paid more attention. I wish I'd asked more questions. Maybe I could have done something. On the night of November 13th, Terrence returned to his motel room and made his final preparations. He laid out his supplies on the bed with methodical precision. The items he had purchased in Virginia were arranged in order. He had left no digital trail during his time in Hillbrook, no credit card transactions, no phone calls from his regular cell phone, no social media check-ins that could place him at the scene. He was thorough in ways that suggested this wasn't an impulsive decision, but something he had contemplated carefully, something he had planned. His final journal entry, written that night in handwriting that was eerily calm. Tomorrow. It ends tomorrow. One way or another, I get what I'm owed. He set his alarm for early afternoon. He wanted to be rested. He wanted to be ready. He wanted to make sure that when he finally confronted the woman who had built a new life without him, he would be in complete control of every moment that followed. What he intended to do when that confrontation occurred, the evidence would make horrifyingly clear. November 14th, 2019. The sun set over Hillbrook at 5:19 that evening, draining the color from the sky and leaving the streets dim and quiet. Denise had spent a normal Tuesday, the kind of unremarkable day that had become the foundation of her new life. She went to the grocery store in the afternoon, purchasing ingredients for a vegetable soup she planned to make: carrots, celery, potatoes, a loaf of crusty bread. She chatted briefly with the cashier about the weather turning cold. She drove home, unloaded her groceries, and began preparing dinner. Sandra saw Denise's car pull into the driveway around 4:30. The lights came on in the kitchen shortly after. Everything looked normal. Everything was normal as far as the world could see. Inside the house, Denise had turned on the television for background noise, a habit she'd developed living alone. She chopped vegetables at the counter, adding them to a pot on the stove, unaware that less than 2 miles away, a man was checking out of his motel room with deadly intentions packed alongside his belongings. Security camera footage from a house 2 doors down captured a dark blue sedan parking on Maple Lane at 5:47 that evening. The driver, identified by investigators through gait analysis and physical build as Terrence Wallace, sat in the vehicle for approximately 12 minutes, watching, waiting, confirming that she was home alone. Then the car door opened, and a figure emerged, moving quickly along the edge of the properties, staying in the shadows cast by trees and fences, avoiding the pools of light thrown by street lamps. Investigators determined that Terrence entered through the back door of Denise's home. There were no signs of forced entry, which suggested either that the door had been unlocked or that Denise had opened it herself. Perhaps she heard a knock and assumed it was Sandra or another neighbor. Perhaps she recognized a voice from her past, impossible as that seemed. Whatever the case, at some point between 6:12 and 6:30 that evening, Terrence Wallace entered the home of the woman he had spent 3 years searching for. What happened inside that house can only be reconstructed from physical evidence: the silent testimony of broken objects and displaced furniture and bloodstains on walls. The struggle began in the kitchen. A glass shattered on the floor, a chair overturned, its legs pointing toward the ceiling. Blood spatter on the wall near the stove indicated a violent impact. Drag marks across the linoleum showed that someone had been pulled toward the back of the house, fighting every inch of the way. The autopsy would reveal defensive wounds on Denise's hands and forearms, evidence that she had fought back against her attacker with everything she had. At approximately 6:14, a neighbor named Harold Mitchell heard a scream from the direction of Denise's house. He described it later as short and sharp, like someone being startled rather than someone crying for help. He paused what he was doing and listened for additional sounds. He heard nothing. He convinced himself he had imagined it, or that it had come from a television turned up too loud. He didn't call the police. He didn't walk over to check on his neighbor. By the time he decided to stop second-guessing himself, it was already too late. Based on the medical examiner's report, Denise Patterson suffered multiple blunt force injuries before being manually strangled. The attack lasted between 10 and 15 minutes. She was conscious for most of it. The last thing she saw was the face of the man she had tried so hard to escape, the man who believed her fortune entitled him to her life. Between 6:30 and 7:15 that evening, Terrence cleaned up what evidence he could. He loaded her body into his car. He took her purse containing her identification and credit cards. He took her phone. Then he drove north into the darkness, toward a stretch of woodland where he believed no one would find her until he was long gone. Denise Marie Patterson was 33 years old. She had been free for less than 3 years, and now she was gone. The morning of November 15th, 2019, Patricia Holbrook laced up her running shoes just like she had every morning for the past 12 years. She was 58 years old, a retired schoolteacher who had made fitness a non-negotiable part of her routine since her husband's heart attack a decade earlier. Her route took her through a stretch of state forest about 20 minutes outside of Richmond, Virginia, a trail she knew so well she could have run it blindfolded. Every route, every turn, Every patch of wildflowers that bloomed in the spring, it was as familiar to her as her own backyard. That morning was cold, the temperature hovering just above freezing, with mist rolling through the trees and turning the world soft and gray. Patricia was about a mile into her run when something caught her eye. Approximately 200 yards off the main trail, partially concealed by fallen leaves and underbrush, she noticed a patch of blue fabric. The kind of blue you might see on a winter coat. It didn't belong there. Nothing that shade existed naturally in these woods. She slowed her pace, then stopped entirely. Something about the shape was wrong. Too still. Too flat against the forest floor. She approached cautiously, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air, her heart beginning to pound in a way that had nothing to do with exercise. When she was close enough to see the outline of a human hand, fingers curled, nails painted a soft coral pink, Patricia Holbrook stopped breathing entirely. Then she turned and ran faster than she had in 20 years, fumbling for the phone in her pocket, her voice shaking as she dialed 911. "There's a body. Oh God, there's a body in the woods. Please send someone. Please hurry." The dispatcher asked for her location, asked her to stay on the line, asked her to describe what she had seen. Patricia did her best, words tumbling out between gasps for air. "She's dead. I know she's dead. No one lies like that if they're alive. There's something wrong with her neck. Please, you have to send someone right now." Deputies from the county sheriff's department arrived within 18 minutes of the call. By 8:15 that morning, the area had been secured as a crime scene. Yellow tape stretched between trees, officers establishing a perimeter to preserve any evidence that might still exist. The body was that of a woman, lying face down in a shallow depression. She wore dark jeans, a blue winter coat, and white sneakers that were now stained with mud and decomposed leaves. Her face was obscured by her position, but even before identification, the investigators could see that she had died violently. Bruising around her throat, contusions on her arms, the stillness of someone whose struggle had ended hours ago. Her purse was gone. Her phone was gone. Her pockets contained nothing but a single grocery receipt, crumpled and damp from the morning dew. The receipt was dated November 14th at 4:17 in the afternoon, from a store in Hillbrook, North Carolina, roughly 40 miles south of where her body now lay. It listed ordinary items, vegetables, broth, bread, the mundane ingredients of a meal she would never eat. Detective Marcus Webb was assigned as lead investigator that morning. He was a 20-year veteran of the department, a methodical man who had learned through experience that the first hours of a homicide investigation are the most crucial. Evidence degrades, memories fade, trails go cold. Standing over the body of this unknown woman, he understood that finding her killer would require speed, precision, and a great deal of luck. "When we have a victim with no ID, stripped of personal effects," he explained later, "we usually think robbery. But the way she was placed, the care taken to conceal her, this wasn't random. This was personal. Whoever did this knew her, and whoever did this wanted us to have a hard time figuring out who she was." The detective was right on both counts, but discovering the truth would take 3 days, and what they found would turn a straightforward homicide investigation into something far more complicated. The grocery receipt found in the victim's pocket became the first thread investigators pulled in their effort to unravel her identity. The store was a Piggly Wiggly in Hillbrook, North Carolina, a small town none of the Virginia detectives had ever heard of. They contacted the store manager, who was able to pull security footage from the afternoon of November 14th. The timestamp on the receipt matched a transaction at Register 3, and the footage showed a woman in a blue coat purchasing the items listed. The same blue coat now bagged as evidence at the medical examiner's office. The woman on the footage was calm, unremarkable, exchanging a few words with the cashier before leaving with her purchases. She drove a silver Honda Accord, and investigators were able to capture the license plate number from the store's parking lot camera. The plate was registered to a Marie Thompson at an address on Maple Lane in Hillbrook. Detective Webb dispatched officers to that address while he continued coordinating the investigation from Virginia. What those officers found when they arrived confirmed his suspicion that this was no random crime. The house on Maple Lane showed clear signs of violent struggle. The back door was unlocked. The kitchen was in disarray, with broken glass on the floor and an overturned chair. There was blood on the walls. Blood on the linoleum. Blood in a pattern that suggested someone had been struck multiple times and then dragged toward the back of the house. The rest of the home was untouched. No ransacked drawers, no overturned furniture in the bedrooms. No signs that the attacker had been searching for valuables. Whatever they wanted, it wasn't jewelry or electronics or cash hidden in a sock drawer. Running the victim's fingerprints through national databases produced a match that transformed the investigation. The woman known in Hillbrook as Marie Thompson was actually Denise Marie Patterson, born in Hampton, Virginia, divorced in 2017, and apparently living under an assumed identity ever since. As investigators dug deeper into her background, they discovered something that reshaped the entire case. Denise Patterson had claimed a Virginia lottery prize of $10 million in February 2017, immediately after her divorce was finalized. When we found out about the lottery, everything clicked into place, Detective Webb recalled. This wasn't a random attack. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong. Someone knew about that money. Someone wanted it. And that someone was almost certainly connected to her past. The investigation turned its focus to her ex-husband, Terrence Dwayne Wallace. His employment records showed a pattern of instability. His financial records showed a man living beyond his means during their marriage and struggling desperately afterward. His behavior following the divorce, the repeated attempts to contact her, the visits to her former workplace, the reports filed with police, all of it painted a picture of obsession. Within days, investigators located the skip tracer Terrence had hired. The man was cooperative once he understood the potential consequences of obstruction. He provided records of the searches he had conducted, the address he had eventually found, and the payment he had received. He asked me to find his ex-wife, the skip tracer explained. Said they had unfinished business. I didn't ask what kind. That's not my job. I just find people. The timeline was damning. Terrence paid for information in early October 2019. He received Denise's address in Hillbrook shortly after, and within weeks, Denise was dead. Detective Webb assembled a team to locate Terrence Wallace. They checked his last known addresses in Virginia. They contacted family members and former associates. They monitored his bank accounts and credit cards for any activity that might reveal his location. The trail led them to Norfolk, to a friend's apartment where Terrence had been staying before his trip to North Carolina. The friend, Victor, confirmed that Terrence had left on November 8th, saying he had business to take care of. He had returned on November 15th, the day Denise's body was found. The evidence was mounting. The case was coming together. All that remained was the arrest. The financial trail proved devastating to any defense Terrence might eventually attempt. Within hours of Denise's estimated time of death, her bank accounts began showing unusual activity. First came small withdrawals from an ATM in North Carolina, a few $100s pulled from her checking account using her debit card. Then larger transfers initiated through online banking, money being moved from her investment accounts into a series of smaller accounts that investigators would trace back to Terrence's control. By the time the banks were alerted and the accounts frozen, nearly $80,000 had been siphoned. He wasn't subtle about it, a financial crime specialist explained during the investigation. He started moving money almost immediately after she was killed. Either he thought no one would notice, or he was so convinced of his own righteousness that he didn't care. Either way, it created an evidentiary link that even the best defense attorney would struggle to explain away. The digital forensics painted an equally damning picture. Terrence had used Denise's phone to access her banking applications, exploiting saved passwords and correctly answering security questions that he would have learned during their marriage, her mother's maiden name, her first pet's name, the street she grew up on. Physical evidence further tightened the noose. Investigators obtained warrants to search locations associated with Terrence, including Victor's garage where a dark blue sedan was stored. The car matched descriptions from security footage captured near Denise's home on the night of her murder. When forensic technicians applied luminol to the trunk, it lit up with the telltale glow of blood that had been cleaned but not eliminated. DNA testing confirmed it was Denise's blood. The trunk had been wiped down thoroughly, the forensic report noted, but luminol detects hemoglobin even after cleaning. There was blood in the seams of the carpet, in the crevices of the spare tire compartment. He thought he'd been careful. He was wrong. Security footage from the route between Hillbrook and the forest where Denise's body was discovered captured Terrence's vehicle at multiple points, creating a timeline that matched the estimated time of death. Footage from a gas station 20 miles from her home showed him filling up at 4:30 on the afternoon of November 14th. Additional footage from a convenience store near the forest showed his car passing by shortly before midnight. Cell tower records corroborated everything. His phone had pinged towers in Hillbrook on multiple dates in November. It had pinged towers along the route to the forest. It had pinged towers on his drive back to Virginia. Purchase records from Virginia stores were obtained and presented as evidence of premeditation. Security footage showed Terrence buying items consistent with restraint and assault in the week before his trip. Each transaction was time-stamped, each purchase made with cash in an apparent attempt to avoid detection. The cumulative weight of evidence was overwhelming. On November 21, 2019, exactly 1 week after Denise's body was discovered, Terrence Dwayne Wallace was arrested at Victor's apartment in Norfolk. He was charged with first-degree murder, felony murder, stalking, and financial crimes related to identity theft and unauthorized access to computer systems. When informed of the charges, he showed no remorse. Instead, he offered what he seemed to believe was a legitimate defense. "She stole from me first," he told the arresting officers. "Everything I did was just taking back what was mine. I was the victim here. She cheated me out of $10 million, and I'm the one in handcuffs?" Detective Webb later described that moment as one of the most chilling of his career. Most killers, when they're caught, they either break down or they lawyer up. They understand on some level that what they did was wrong. Wallace was different. He genuinely believed he was justified. He genuinely believed that her money gave him the right to take her life. "I've been doing this job for 20 years, and I've never seen entitlement that absolute." The trial of Terrence Dwayne Wallace began on March 15, 2021, after multiple delays related to defense motions and the complexities of jury selection in a case that had received significant media coverage. It was held in North Carolina, where the murder had occurred, in a courthouse that required additional security due to public interest in the proceedings. The prosecution was led by Angela Warren, a career prosecutor known for her methodical approach and her ability to make complex evidence accessible to juries. Warren opened her case by walking the jury through the complete timeline, from Denise's lottery win in October 2016 through her careful divorce strategy, her anonymous claim of the prize money, her disappearance into a new life, and ultimately her murder at the hands of the man she had tried to escape. She presented evidence with the precision of an architect building a structure brick by brick. Cell tower data, placing Terrence in Hillbrook before the killing. Security footage of his car near her home on the night she died. Testimony from the skip tracer about being hired to locate her. Blood evidence recovered from his vehicle. Purchase records showing premeditation. Financial transfers from her accounts in the hours after her death. She showed the jury his journal entries, the ones recovered from his motel room, reading aloud passages that documented his obsession. "Everything she has should be mine," Warren quoted. "She's going to understand what she took from me." She played audio from his post-arrest interview, letting the jury hear in his own voice his insistence that Denise had wronged him, that his actions were somehow justified. The defense was led by Robert Maxwell, a veteran criminal attorney, who understood that the evidence against his client was overwhelming. He couldn't dispute the physical proof or the financial trail or the cell tower records. Instead, he attempted to reframe the narrative, painting Terrence as a man pushed to breaking point by betrayal. "My client is not a monster," Maxwell argued in his opening statement. "He's a man who was lied to, manipulated, and abandoned. When he discovered that his wife had hidden $10 million from him, something inside him shattered. What happened next was tragic, but it was not premeditated. It was the desperate act of a man who had lost everything." Maxwell attempted to argue that Terrence had gone to Hillbrook intending only to confront Denise and demand an explanation. The murder, he claimed, was an explosion of emotion when that confrontation went wrong, not a planned execution. He highlighted Denise's deception, her careful timing of the divorce, her disappearance without explanation, framing her choices as emotional manipulation that had traumatized his client over 3 years. The prosecution dismantled this argument systematically in rebuttal. Sudden emotion doesn't last for days, Warren countered. A man acting on impulse doesn't spend time watching his target's movements. He doesn't take notes on her daily routine. He doesn't purchase restraints and weapons beforehand. She pointed to the journal entries, the surveillance pattern, the digital precautions Terrence had taken to avoid being traced. What the defense calls breaking is what the evidence calls planning. This was predation. The jury listened to testimony from investigators, forensic specialists, the person who had located Denise, neighbors who had heard the scream, and financial experts who traced the movement of money from Denise's accounts to Terrence's control. They watched security footage and examined photographs and reviewed records that told a story of calculation and violence. They saw a man who had spent 3 years building grievances in his mind until murder seemed like justice. They saw a woman who had tried everything to escape and had almost succeeded. The question before them was straightforward. Was this premeditated murder or a crime of passion? The evidence pointed overwhelmingly in one direction. The jury deliberated for 11 hours, spread across 2 days. They reviewed the evidence methodically, discussing the timeline, examining the physical proof, and considering the competing narratives presented by prosecution and defense. Several jurors later described the deliberation as thorough, but not contentious. The facts were clear. The evidence was comprehensive. The only question was whether they could find any reasonable interpretation that supported the defense's theory. They could not. On March 24, 2021, the jury returned a unanimous verdict of guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, stalking, financial crimes including identity theft and unauthorized computer access. The defense's arguments had been rejected entirely. The extended surveillance, the careful purchases, the journal entries, documenting his intentions, all of it added up to a picture of deliberate, calculated murder. When the verdict was read aloud, Terrence Wallace showed no visible reaction. He stared straight ahead, his face a mask, as though the words didn't penetrate whatever world he had constructed inside his own mind. In the gallery behind him, Denise's mother Barbara wept quietly, surrounded by family members who had attended every day of the trial. They held hands and leaned on each other, their grief visible but contained. This moment was not celebration. It was the closest thing to closure they would ever receive. The sentencing hearing took place 1 week later. Before Judge Patricia Hansen delivered her decision, she allowed victim impact statements from Denise's family. Barbara Patterson approached the podium with a folded piece of paper trembling in her hands. Her voice was soft at first, barely audible, then grew stronger as she spoke. "My daughter spent her whole life taking care of other people," she said. "She worked herself to exhaustion so that man could stay home and do nothing. She paid his bills and cooked his meals and tolerated his criticism because she believed in the vows she'd made. And when she finally had a chance to be free, when she finally could live for herself, he couldn't let her go. He hunted her down like she was something he owned." She paused, steadying herself against the podium. "My baby didn't belong to anyone. She was her own person, and she deserved to live." Judge Hansen listened without interruption, her expression grave. When the statements concluded, she addressed Terrence directly, her voice carrying the weight of the court's authority. "Mr. Wallace, you have shown no remorse for what you did. Even now, even after this jury has heard all the evidence and rendered its verdict, you continue to believe you were wronged. You continue to believe that Ms. Patterson's money entitled you to her life." She paused, letting her words settle in the silent courtroom. "The evidence shows a pattern of surveillance, planning, and violence that goes far beyond any reasonable response to emotional distress. You tracked this woman for years. You hunted her across state lines. You ended her life because you believed you were owed something. This court cannot restore what you took, but it can ensure that you will never harm another person." She sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder conviction, plus an additional 20 years for the stalking and financial crimes to be served consecutively. Terrence would die behind bars. As guards moved to escort him from the courtroom, he turned toward Denise's family with something that might have been a smile. "She did this," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "All of it. She made this happen." His delusion remained intact even as the doors closed behind him. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Barbara Patterson spoke briefly to reporters. "Justice was served today," she said simply. "But justice can't bring my daughter back. Nothing can bring her back. All I can do now is make sure her memory means something." She had already begun planning the foundation that would carry Denise's name and help other women escape the kind of danger her daughter had fled. Denise Patterson's estate, including what remained of her lottery winnings after Terrence's theft, was distributed according to a will she had prepared in 2018 during the quiet years of her new life in Hillbrook. The majority of her fortune went to her mother and siblings, providing financial security for a family that had struggled with money for as long as any of them could remember. Smaller portions went to charities supporting domestic violence survivors, organizations that helped women escape situations like the one Denise had fled. Her mother, Barbara, used part of her inheritance to establish the Denise Patterson Memorial Fund, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing financial assistance and legal support to abuse survivors seeking to leave dangerous relationships. She wrote in her will that she wanted the money to help people who felt trapped the way she once did, Barbara explained during the fund's launch ceremony. Even in planning for her death, she was thinking about others. That was just who she was, always taking care of everyone else. Since its creation in 2022, the fund has provided assistance to over 300 individuals across Virginia and North Carolina, helping them access legal representation, emergency housing, and the resources needed to start new lives. The small town of Hillbrook held a memorial service on the first anniversary of Denise's death. Neighbors who had known her only as Marie Thompson gathered at the Baptist church, where she had sat quietly in the back pew, learning for the first time the full story of who she really was and what she had survived. Sandra, the neighbor who had shared coffee and conversation with her, spoke through tears. "We all felt guilty afterward," she admitted. "We knew she was hiding from something, but we didn't push. We thought we were respecting her privacy. Maybe if we'd asked more questions, paid more attention to that car she mentioned seeing on the street, things could have been different." Following Denise's case, several states strengthened their protections for lottery winners who request anonymity. Virginia implemented additional safeguards to prevent the kind of accidental disclosure that had led the Lottery Commission's letter to be forwarded to Terrence's location. The changes included stricter protocols for handling winner correspondence and enhanced training for postal workers regarding the sensitivity of such documents. Denise Patterson's death highlighted a gap in how we protect lottery winners from people who might harm them, a policy advocate noted. The changes made since then won't bring her back, but they might save someone else. In the years since the trial, experts in domestic violence have used Denise's case as an example in training programs and awareness campaigns. Her story illustrates both the lengths to which survivors will go to escape abuse and the persistent danger that follows them even after they believe they're safe. She changed her name, moved to a new state, lived carefully to avoid attention, one expert observed. And still, one careless social media tag from a distant relative was enough to unravel everything. In the digital age, true safety is incredibly difficult to achieve. Terrence Dwayne Wallace remains incarcerated at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. He has filed multiple appeals, all of which have been denied. In prison interviews, he continues to insist that he was wronged, that Denise took what was rightfully his, that his actions were justified by her betrayal. His delusion appears permanent. Barbara Patterson has refused all requests to communicate with him. "I have nothing to say to that man," she stated simply. "He took my daughter. There are no words that can address that." The house on Maple Lane in Hillbrook was sold in 2020. The new owners renovated extensively, tearing out the kitchen where the attack occurred and expanding the garden that Denise had loved. The roses and hydrangeas she planted still bloom every spring, tended now by strangers who never knew the woman who created them. It's a small legacy, perhaps, flowers growing in a yard where a woman once found peace. But legacies don't have to be grand to matter. Sometimes the most important thing we leave behind is simply evidence that we existed, that we hoped, that we tried. At the beginning of this documentary, we asked a simple question. Who was the woman found in those woods outside Richmond on that cold November morning? We now know the answer. Her name was Denise Marie Patterson. She was a waitress who remembered everyone's birthday, a daughter who pretended she wasn't hungry so her brothers could eat more, a survivor who escaped an abusive marriage by winning the lottery and disappearing into a new life, a woman who wanted nothing more than peace and quiet and a garden full of flowers. For nearly 3 years, she had exactly that. Then the past caught up with her, but knowing who she was doesn't answer all the questions her story raises. There are no easy answers here, no simple lessons that wrap everything up neatly. Just complications and contradictions, and the kind of moral ambiguity that keeps us awake at night. Was Denise right to hide the lottery winnings from her husband? Legal experts agree she was within her rights. She claimed the money after the divorce was finalized. She owed him nothing under the law. But some have wondered whether her secrecy, however justified, inflamed an already unstable man. Whether honesty, as risky as it would have been, might have led to a safer resolution. There's no way to know. She made the choice she believed would protect her, and for nearly 3 years, it worked. Could she have been protected? This is perhaps the most painful question. Denise changed her name. She moved to a new state. She avoided social media. She lived carefully to avoid drawing attention. And still, one tagged photograph from a family reunion was enough to undo years of caution. In an age of digital surveillance and professionals who locate people for payment and careless posts from distant relatives, can anyone truly disappear? The answer, increasingly, seems to be no. Privacy has become an illusion we maintain through luck as much as effort. Was the money worth it? Some would say the lottery was a curse disguised as a blessing, that it marked Denise as a target and led directly to her death. Others would argue that the money gave her something priceless, 3 years of freedom she never would have experienced otherwise. 3 years of gardens and quiet mornings and waking up without fear. 3 years of being herself instead of someone's provider and target. Perhaps both things can be true at once. And then there's the question that haunts everyone who hears this story. If Denise had never bought that scratch-off ticket, if she had walked past the lottery display and gone straight home that October night, would she still be alive today? Perhaps. She might still be working at the Starlight Grill, still married to a man who drained her resources and crushed her spirit. She might have lived for decades more, but she would not have lived free. She made a choice to bet on herself, to believe she deserved better. And for a little while, that bet paid off. Money doesn't create monsters. It reveals them. Terrence Wallace was dangerous long before he learned about the lottery winnings. His entitlement, his inability to take responsibility, his need to control and possess, these traits were present from the very beginning. The money didn't make him capable of murder. It gave him a target. Denise Patterson's story is a tragedy, but it's also a reminder. A reminder that the most dangerous place for many people is inside their own home. That the most threatening person is often someone they once loved. That escape, even when planned perfectly, is never guaranteed. And yet, people continue to escape, continue to rebuild, continue to find freedom. Because the alternative, staying trapped, staying silent, staying afraid, is not living at all. Denise wanted to open a cafe called Second Chances. She never got that second chance. But because of her story, because of the fund established in her name, because of the awareness her case has raised, others will. And perhaps that's the only justice that really matters. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more documentaries like this one. Stories like Denise's deserve to be told.